Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited that I have you all here this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about instructional feedback that moves teacher practice. I'm Michele Regan. I am a senior client director here at Inspired Instruction. I've been here for 10 years now. So while we've gotten to see lots of different practices come into fashion, this is one that will never get old, right? We always need to be refining our ability to give teachers feedback that they are able to hear and then be able to improve practice. So that's what we're going to spend our time on today. Welcome, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so our goals for today are to first think about the culture of continuous improvement in our buildings. Most of you that signed up for this webinar are school leaders in some form or fashion. So whether that be a building principal, whether that be a director of curriculum and instruction, or anywhere, in between or other roles, the idea here is really how are we leading our school buildings, our school districts with that culture of continuous learning and improvement. We're going to also talk about how to make sure that our feedback is evidence-based using real classroom data. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, how are we going to turn that feedback into those improved practices that we want to see? Okay, I'm just going to, for a little bit of housekeeping, let you know that you can use the QA feature if you have questions throughout, and we'll do our best, myself and a team member, to answer those questions. We will also be sharing resources with you today. If I have time, I'm going to try to walk you through the 4 different resources that I'll be sharing with you, and you'll receive those after the webinar. Okay, and then finally, we do provide an evaluation, and we would love to hear from you if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to fill that out. It helps us with learning what it is that would, best help and best serve all of you in the schools. So again, if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be appreciated. Okay, so let's get ready to dive in. All right, so we're going to start with creating that culture of continuous learning and improvement. And there's one thing that I could point to in all of the research and also in practical experience and anecdotal conversations. What is that key element? And that key element is you as a leader. The importance of your modeling and your communication of your expectations cannot be understated. It's really critical that the teachers whom you give feedback to know who you are as a leader, that they know what it is you're looking for, that they know the commitments that you have to improvement, and drilling down even more, that they know the specifics. So, what are your priorities? What are the initiatives that you'll be focused on this year? Okay, that's really, really important. And so, how do we do that? Because we know that you have multiple hats you're wearing and lots of different competing um, interests in terms of your time, right? So, how do we make this efficient and effective? So, I always like to start with this idea of being seen before you can be heard. Think about a time when somebody shared with you that you taught them something, that they learned something from you. That just fills you with a sense of pride and competency. And that is the same thing that your teachers want to feel. And so, the most important thing that you can do as a way to kick off this whole idea of strengthening your feedback approach is to be present in the spaces where learning is happening. Okay, so this can look a variety of different ways. First, being really intentional about being outside of your office. We know again that there are so many things competing for your time, meetings, parent phone calls. Certainly, there's going to be time that's needed to be spent with a closed door to your office. But being really intentional and thinking about and planning ahead for being present in all those spaces where the learning is happening, that's going to be critical. So I always advise people to start right there. Think about times that are high impact, high traffic times. So when kids enter and leave the building, lunchtime, changing of classes, we want both the teachers and the students to see your face and to know that you're invested in what's happening in the school building. You want to feel like you have your finger on the pulse. Okay. And then step two of that, going further, is really being inside the classrooms. So making yourself readily available to dropping in, say hello, and asking teachers to be invited in. Could you be invited in to be a guest reader? Could you come in and check out students working on a project? Okay, so we really want to create that two-way dialogue, right? We want to make sure that you are making your presence known and that also you will be invited into these classrooms. Really critical that there's that sense of belonging and that we're all in this together. Okay, when teachers are seen and when you are seen, you will now be able to be heard. Teachers will be much more likely to receive feedback that you are giving if they know that you are invested. And that starts by being seen. Okay. A couple of kind of quick tips. Okay. The first is plan in advance. You might have the best intentions that you're thinking about, oh, I'm going to be out of my office for half the day. Well, that's likely not going to happen unless you're strategic in your planning. So perhaps you tell your secretary you want no meetings between 10 and 11:30 every day. That might be an overreach, but you get the idea. You want to be really thoughtful about just ensuring that you're making time for yourself to be out and about. The second is pick a starting place. So perhaps you want to start in a particular wing of the building. Perhaps you're going to have Mondays be a certain place that you start in the building. You start at the top floor and work your way down and spend 40 minutes, and however far you get, you make a note and you pick up the next day. Okay. But just make sure that it's something that's easy to replicate. Setting a goal, right? Maybe you have a goal that you say, I want to be in 5 classrooms in the week. It doesn't seem like a lot. So maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe you up that as you go. Okay. But as we're talking today, you'll notice this webinar is not necessarily focused just on evaluative classroom visits or walkthroughs, but really any opportunity you have to give teachers feedback, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about is the best practices for any opportunity that you can share feedback. Okay. So think about that goal, set a goal for yourself now, and then reconsider that goal in 6 weeks' time. Okay. And this last piece, ask to be invited in, it seems like such a simple and obvious thing, but I bet that in a lot of places it doesn't happen. And likely you won't be asked if you don't let people know you would like to be invited in. Okay. It could be really as simple as saying to teachers when you're visiting, hey, I see you're working on this project. Invite me back in when it's completed, right? So it's just an informal kind of, hey, ask me, I'm invested. I'd love to see what's next. Okay. Okay, so what does this do for you? So besides the fact that now you're seen around the building, it really allows that opportunity for dialogue. We want this idea of feedback to be seen through a couple of different lenses. And one of them is that idea of a dialogue where teachers can ask questions, where you ask questions and you get more detail and more context about what was happening. So we want to have real authentic conversations with your team. Okay, so kind of 4 ways that you can think about doing this. And again, you are going to be provided with different handouts, resources that you can use. Not every single slide, but certainly some of the forms that I've created for you. But consider these 4 areas. So are you communicating your instructional priorities and the connected why? So for example, if your priority for the year for every teacher is to have students be more engaged with the cognitive demand, right? You want to walk into classrooms and see students grappling with problems. You want to see them in small groups. You want to see less teacher talk, more student engagement. Okay. That should be communicated in a variety of ways. Consider your PLCs having this focus. Consider your professional development, providing teachers with strategies to meet those instructional priorities. If you have any kind of communication that you do via email, newsletter, that type of thing, you want this communicated really frequently so that they are not taken off guard when you come in and your questions or your observations are really about those priorities. That should feel like very much the next step. Okay. The why is really important. So, for example, the one that I used around having students engaged in cognitive demand, right? We know that no real learning happens if each student is not grappling with or actively engaging with the material. It can't be just five students and then the rest of the students sitting there. There's no evidence that there's going to be any learning taking place. So if you share with teachers, hey, by doing this, engaging in this priority, you're going to see more students actually mastering the material. It'll show up on assessments and things like that. That why is an important driver of teachers actually engaging in the practices that you would like to see. Okay. You also want to acknowledge positive contributions. So imagine you're stopping in a classroom, you're just popping in. It is not a formal evaluation, but you comment on any efforts that the teacher is making around that particular priority. Perhaps you walk in and you see a think, pair, share. You're just stopping in. You want to let the teacher know, hey, I really like that think, pair, share that I saw. I love that all students are engaged. Okay. Again, this is just a brief, very connected and targeted comment related to your instructional priorities. Even if it's just an attempt, I appreciate you trying such and such. Okay. We're not necessarily looking for outcomes at this point. Also, when you're in those rooms, consider the conversations that you're having as a curious colleague. Okay. Don't always go in with the mindset of being the school principal or the director of curriculum. Think about what curious conversations that you can have. And one of the ways I like to frame this is if we are all lifetime learners, if we are all focused on learning new things and continuing to improve, then being curious means you get to walk away, hopefully, having learned something new. It could be that you learned something new about some of the students in that classroom. You could have learned something new about, again, something that's related to the curriculum that students are engaged in. But basically, you want your conversations to really be an opening point. Okay. And then offer support that encourages buy-in. Again, you're looking for that student engagement. You make a comment about a positive attempt. And now you say to them the all-important phrase, what do you need from me? Okay. Think about how powerful that is. If you walked into a teacher's classroom, commented on them trying something, but maybe it wasn't the complete strategy, or maybe it wasn't done to fidelity, or maybe it was, you could tell, a first attempt. How great would it be for that teacher to hear, what do you need from me around this particular priority? Okay, super powerful. They may or may not have a response, and that's okay. The idea is you're putting it out there that any observations, walkthroughs, stop-ins that you do are going to be connected to improvement of practice, and that you're committed to whatever supports are needed to make that practice improve. Okay. Alrighty. I know this is a lot of information. Again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to drop those into the chat or the Q&A, and we will have some answers for you. And then I will also take time at the end. Okay. So I threw this in here and this struck me. I would ask you, if we were using the chat, I would ask you what words jump out at you. So I'll give you a moment to read. I think we've all heard of that feeling teachers get of a gotcha, right? And we certainly don't want to have our presence in their classrooms, our walkthroughs, even our formal evaluations. We don't want them to feel like a gotcha. But what I love about this is the second half. I love the idea of dignifying the work, the effort that they are putting into it, and dignifying them as a professional. So if we think about observations, walkthroughs, learning walks, whatever you call them, as dignifying their work, I think it just flips the script and it just helps create that new mindset around continuous learning and continuous improvement. Okay, so imagine now we are starting with our learning walks. We're considering going down to the kindergarten wing tomorrow morning, okay, or the high school math department. We're going to be stopping by, okay. We want to use that all-important educational kind of concept of begin with the end in mind. Before you ever leave your office, you want to consider a few different things. Okay. You want to think about what are you looking for? What questions you'll ask? How will you gather any evidence? How and when will you communicate that feedback? And how will you support teachers? Okay, so I know this kind of sounds like a lot of different things. What I've done is taken that and put it in a really basic, you will see this is not brain surgery. Really, really basic. Whoop, little table for you. It literally should be like a way to force yourself to think about these things before you walk out. You want to make sure that your time is maximized. You know that time is limited. And so we want to make sure it's been very thoughtful and purposeful when you actually show up in that classroom. Okay, so I made this. This is going to be shared with you. And essentially, really what we're doing is I threw some ideas in here. If your focus is student engagement, okay, you're going to want to operationalize that into specific behaviors. And I'm going to show you a way to do that in a moment. Then we're going to think about some different types of questions. I threw some on here. Again, I'm going to share these with you later. We're going to think about how do I gather evidence. And so in this case, we're going to talk about low inference notes. We're going to talk about how will you and when will you communicate feedback. So we're going to look at, in this case, during a teacher's prep, just a very informal dialogue. We're going to stop in planning about 10 minutes. Okay. And then how will I support teachers? Again, I'm going to share another tool with you, but this should just make it such that, again, with multiple priorities, you don't want to be walking into a classroom with 5 different things on your mind and not having a real plan, even if it is just a super informal visit. Okay. All right. So we're going to begin with the end in mind. We're going to make sure that we walk through those questions. And then we're going to get started, right? We're going to get to our visit. So I'm visiting, and now what do I want to see? Okay. I did mention that idea of operationalizing the focus area, that expectation, more student engagement, less teacher talk. We want to now operationalize that into teacher and student behaviors. Okay. In this particular case, student discussion, right? So in this case, we're talking about student discussion is present in all lessons. Okay, so what am I looking for? I'm looking for these best practices, that the teacher prompts the discussion, but the students are carrying it on. They've clearly been trained how to talk to one another instead of the teacher. They're adding on, they're making connections. And then we're doing step 2 with that, which is that we want to make sure that they're using complex language, academic language, and again, using those accountable talk pieces. Okay, so we want to have thought that through, and I'm going to share a tool with you that you can use not just for one visit, but for many visits. Because if you think about it, there are specific practices that any leader would likely want to see when they walk into a classroom. Now, we want it to be targeted. Okay, in these cases, we're targeting it to 1 or 2 expectations, 1 or 2 behaviors, right? We're keeping it very targeted. If you were doing a formal evaluation and you have your evaluation tool and you have many different factors, Obviously you have to keep them all in mind. But again, the idea is you want to make sure you're focusing on the actual behaviors that you want to see. Okay. So here's the resource that I'm sharing that I think can help with something like this. You want to have those practices, whatever tool you use. You could see here that I pulled from Danielson domain 3. Marzano has a domain that's specific to best instructional practices. So do other tools. But imagine that you're going in and you want to focus on one or more of these. What we want to do is create this as a bank. You will have this going forward, whether you're stopping in, you know, kindergarten classrooms, middle school classrooms. It's going to look a little different, but you're going to have what is the expectation? What are the behaviors? And then what are related questions that I might ask a teacher to elicit the kind of conversation that I want to have about this practice. Okay. So imagine you have this completed in advance. You work on it over the summer or some other time. Every time now that you go to do a walkthrough, you have this at the ready. Okay. So in addition to having those questions, you'll also have specific resources that you can provide to teachers. Okay, if I'm asking a teacher a question like, what did you learn from listening to the student discussion that you led? If they come back and say, well, they were mostly quiet, I had to prompt them all the time, and there were some groups that one person took over the whole discussion. Well, then you have some resources that you can provide that are related to them moving that practice forward. Okay, so I think a very handy tool that you can use. And if you have multiple evaluators in your school, the other nice thing about that is that it helps to make things consistent so that you don't have four different people asking four different types of questions and some give resources and some don't, right? So it helps keep us consistent. Okay. Okay, I'm going to pause for a moment. And I should have said at the beginning, but I want to make sure that I'm clear saying it now. None of these is the right way. There is no one right way. Okay. You have to think about your staff, your role, all of the different components of your school. Is this a new initiative? Is this a full formal evaluation? But there's no one right way. I'm offering you tools to make this more efficient and more effective. Okay. So by the end, hopefully there'll be one or two things that you decide you're going to take away. But again, please don't feel like there's one right way. Okay. So when we think about gathering evidence, when we're in a classroom, maybe we're doing an informal learning walk, we want to make sure that we gather evidence that supports a teacher's ability to receive the feedback. What would help them understand why and how you want to move or improve things? Okay, so we want to think about gathering evidence. So, one that I think is a very simple system to use and an effective system to use are low inference notes. So, basically, with low inference notes, you're taking a snapshot of what you saw during that class time. Some people will script everything they hear. That is a skill that you have to develop. You could bullet point, but it also depends on the purpose of this evaluation. If you had concerns about, some kind of language that teachers were or weren't using with students, certainly scripting would be the best way to go. But for a regular informal, I like doing a snapshot where you are literally time stamping and making note of teacher moves and student moves. Why is this a good way to go? Because it implies no judgment. You are literally only writing down what you observed. Okay, so here's some examples. This is the scripting, I'm not the scripting, this is the snapshot. Okay, so you have a 3 column. You can use any notebook paper. You don't have to use this form, although I am providing this for you. And you're making note of the time or the frequency of a particular practice. You're noting the teacher moves and the student moves. So in this particular case, I'm noting that, hey, from 10:04 to 10:33, this was a review experience. Okay. This is giving me real evidence of what is or is not happening in this classroom. Okay. So again, I think it's pretty simple to do and to learn. You don't need much. Okay. So what else is involved in this? The other piece that I like to have is a section for wonderings. So what questions are coming to mind for you as you are taking these low inference notes? Again, non-judgmental, but things that could elicit conversation or that you're wondering, could it look different if we did it a different way? Could we, if this is whole group, should we make it small group? So you could see that I put some very specific wonderings here. These are really acting as a starting place, depending on how and when you will give feedback to the teacher. You might use these as a jumping off point, and you might then create open-ended questions that can help get you here, right? Because these are fairly specific. But again, it's really a place to use how you would like. It's a place for you to put your wonderings. And again, I have this available for you. Okay. So imagine you go in, you have a pretty regular schedule of dropping in teachers' classrooms. You are using low inference notes. Now what? Okay, we want to think about how do you give feedback. So especially in a way, in a place where we're looking at a more informal kind of approach, we want to think about it as dialogue. Okay, so these are four questions you can ask yourself. How does it help me build a trusting relationship? How does this conversation shed light on something you may have observed that you were wondering about? How could it inspire and motivate someone to take the steps to improve? And then going back to what we learned earlier, how does it dignify the work and the professional doing it? So these are kind of just big picture questions that you can consider in terms of looking at feedback as a dialogue versus looking at feedback that is a one way only. Okay. A dialogue is going to help you hit these four areas. Okay. I'm going to give you a series of questions. And before you saw on that little planning template that I had noted open-ended questions and I listed a couple of types. I'm not going to go through all of them with you, but you can see that these are questions that can be helpful to create a dialogue. Okay. I think number one is critical. Before I would ever give feedback to anybody, I want to check the pulse. How do they think it went? Perhaps this happened to me. I was in a classroom, I was doing an informal observation, and the person just had two new students admitted or enrolled in their class that day. The person was completely thrown, right? That's important information for me to know for two reasons, right? I need to know their perception because that is going to help frame the conversation. But also, I would want to know something unusual that was taking place. Okay. You can do that further by the second one, getting more context. So you can notice something, mention, I noticed such and such. How does that fit in with blank? If your focus is student engagement and you're noticing that a long time had gone by before students were engaged, you could ask that question for more context. Maybe you walked in right after a group that students were working with their peers for 20 minutes. Okay, important. Other questions. So aha moments, perception, interpretation, comparison, all of these can be helpful in creating a dialogue. The idea, again, is teachers feeling heard, that you took the time to engage them in a conversation. Okay. Okay. So now, how do we actually give the feedback? Okay. Those questions are a precursor to meaningful feedback. So what does that mean? If we want to make sure that feedback moves teacher practice, it has to be meaningful to the teacher or to the person you're giving feedback to. So that first one, I'm going to use this ladder of feedback. Okay. That first step on the ladder is to clarify, to ask questions that clarify what you just saw. Okay. It could be, I'm going to give you some samples in a few minutes. Okay. But it could be open-ended, like what we just saw on the slide before, or it could be very pointed ones. Okay, but the idea is you want to, again, show your curiosity and clarify anything that needs to be clarified. The second is you're going to comment on the strengths. Okay, I think we're very used to this in the sandwich model, which I'll talk about in a second. We typically start with that positive, right? So we're going to give the positive, and then we're going to share any concerns or any commentary that we have around a practice that maybe we want to see done differently or maybe is missing. Okay, so we're going to share our comments on the concerns, and that is going to be directly tied to suggestions. Okay, so we can't really skip any of these steps. You will find that this is much more meaningful than that typical sandwich approach. So what's wrong with that? You know, if you've heard of it, sandwich or hamburger, positive, next steps are negative, and then positive again. Okay, kind of two things could happen. Number one, you have the teacher that only hears the positives because you ended on that positive note. And so that area of concern was stuck in the middle, but because you went back to a positive, they're not really focused on doing anything about that concern. Okay. And so that can be an issue. Also, with the sandwich approach, there's no connection to suggestions or next steps. You want to have those suggestions directly connected to your feedback. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some samples. I want to remind you about these 4 steps so that when we look at it, we can really be thinking, does this feedback hit all of these? Okay, so I thought I had this on. One was supposed to come in after the other, so I apologize for that. But let's take a look. Look at the yellow square. So this feedback, during your lesson, most questions asked were lower level, either knowledge or comprehension questions. Students were not challenged to explain their thinking and had very little opportunity to discuss their ideas with each other. So does this have all 4 steps? Okay, there's no clarifying question. There isn't really even a strength, to be honest. It's not overly derogatory or negative, meaning they're not saying you didn't or things like that, but they are framing it as students weren't challenged and had little opportunity. So if you're the teacher, if you're the person receiving this, how likely are you to receive it in a way that you're going to change what you're doing? Okay, let's instead look over at the blue square. I'm going to give you a second to read this. And as you're reading it, think about those 4 steps. You can see that I underlined because I wanted us to compare the language used in the yellow versus the blue. Okay, so if I was walking through and going to actually like diagram this, I would say, yes, there is a clarifying question. So that's the first piece. Is there a strength? Yes. They're identifying not only that they did the warm-up activity, but that it engaged a specific percentage of students, which is awesome. You can figure that out by using your little tallies in the frequency part of the low inference notes. And then they're making a suggestion, okay, to move them higher with that critical word consider. Consider preparing questions that require, right, the 3 higher levels of blooms. And then if you notice, okay, they're giving some suggestions, but they're also giving an actual link to a resource. Okay, so they've noted an area of concern, they've connected it directly to suggestions. Okay, so while it might not feel or look that different, it does feel different. And if you're the teacher receiving it, it definitely feels different. It feels like, hey, that was really constructive feedback. There's something I can do about it. And it's not hypercritical in the terms of like students were not challenged or very little opportunity. Let's look at a few more. Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 samples. One is a sample for a new teacher or a teacher that's struggling to master some important practice. Okay, so let's take a look at that first. I broke this down for you into the 4 steps. So the type of feedback that you give to these kinds of teachers, okay? This is important that the feedback is framed as being supportive and very targeted, right? We do not want to comment on 5 things. We want to make sure that they're building those foundational skills, and we're going to also maintain their dignity. Okay, so as we look at this, you'll see it's broken into clarification question, strength, concern, suggestion. I'm going to let you read this. So if I were the teacher receiving this feedback personally, I would feel very good about the way this is written because the strength is not a throwaway compliment. It's very, very specific, right? They're commenting on the clear instructions and even commenting on the student moves, right? Students reference these instructions, always keeping the students at the center. Okay. And in the third, the concern, again, students at the center. So it was unclear if the students understood. Okay. And so they're making the connection for the teacher. We're not saying you didn't do X or you did too much of Y. We're bringing it back to the student. And then finally, notice how many times there is not only a suggestion, but an offer of help. Let's collaborate. Okay. Even up here, let's try. Then they talk about, I'd be happy to co-plan. Okay. So again, this is feeling very supportive and meaningful. Okay, let's take a look at one for a teacher who is either a developing teacher, been there 3 years or more, or this could be a veteran teacher, but just needs to work on a particular strategy, skill, something new to the building, a new initiative, right? They still require feedback. And so you might just frame it a little bit differently. We're going to either support, because they might be very confident, support that confidence or build confidence while also growing an area that they need support with. Okay. So in this case, we ask the question, we provide that positive, and then we connect at the end. You see the concern and the suggestion together. I'm going to give you a moment to read that. So again, I am considering my audience. I'm thinking about that veteran teacher. Do I want to give a veteran teacher 5 different things to consider, to try new? Do I want to say to them, let's collaborate? I might not, right? Because they might feel put off by that, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't try a new strategy. Okay. And that you're not going to follow up. And I think that's the important piece is feedback without follow up is pointless. So let's see, how are we going to follow up? I know we are approaching the end of our time in a few minutes, but this is another tool that I'm going to share with you that I think could be very useful. Now, you may have coaches in your building or instructional supervisors that sometimes come in and play that coaching role. But often, many school leaders, principals, even curriculum directors, sometimes you are the one that's going to have to actually provide the support, right? You heard me mention the resources and even those let's collaborate ideas. Well, this is a tool it's very simplified, but it's again going from connecting the observation, the feedback with a full circle support, resource, checkup, evidence, all of it. So by using a tool like this, again, I'm going to provide it. You can modify it however you like. We want to be able to bring a teacher all the way through the process. Okay, so I'm going to share this with you. It's called the 5 S's. So we want to create a shared vision. We want to brainstorm some solutions. So these first 2 boxes, and it includes the directions on the sheet that I'm going to give you, these first few boxes you do with the teacher. So you may come in, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up. You will come in with a few questions. Okay, so as the observer, you're not going to bring your observation notes, right? You're going to leave that aside, but you're going to fill this in with just some questions you had. Okay, this is one way to actually put things into practice. Okay, and then as you're having that dialogue, you're going to brainstorm some solutions with the teacher. Now, keep in mind, I'm sure you have a few that you've already thought of, but you want to make sure this feels like a list that was curated by the two of you. Okay. And then once this list has been curated, the teacher gets to choose, or the coachee gets to choose what they're going to try. Okay. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to come back to any of these, but we want them to try something new, then we should have the buy-in. They're going to go ahead and choose. You could highlight it, you could add some notes here, and then you're going to consider what supports might they need. Is it a resource they need? Is it a peer visit? Is it, at the next PLC, we're going to do some role plays. So you want to be thoughtful about what are the supports they may need. And then these last 2 are going to be the accountability pieces. Okay. And this is really important. If there's no accountability, then you can't expect improvement. So things like observations, an implementation date. I'm gonna come check in. I'm gonna have a coaching observation, or the school coach is gonna come. But we want to schedule it out. So there are very concrete expectations on both sides. And then lastly, what evidence will there be to show the change in behavior or the improvement? So maybe this teacher is going to record a short video and then share it during a PLC. Maybe they'll bring an artifact to a PLC. Maybe they'll submit something to yourself. Um, Maybe you'll invite them back. Maybe this will say, ask Miss So and so, the principal, to come back in the week of such and such. Okay. But this should really close the loop, that it's not just feedback for feedback's sake. It is not just checking the boxes, but it's turning feedback into improvement. Okay. So we covered a lot. We covered a lot in this time. Really, what I want you to think about as you're leaving today, and certainly don't leave yet because we have that evaluation we want you to fill out. But I would like you to consider, what are your takeaways from today? Again, I told you there's not one right way. You might like something for informal learning walks, but you have something very different you do for formal evaluations. That's okay. Okay, but I want you to think about those and think about, what are you going to try first? If this is something that you have other evaluators in your building, maybe what are you going to share, right? Maybe you're going to bring this back to your team. Okay, so I hope you all found this useful. I do want to just share with you that survey, so bear with me. Um, you will look for those resources in your email over the next couple of days. And again, I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm going to add this to the chat. And if someone, maybe, can someone let me know that they received um, the Google Forms link? That would be helpful. And what I'll do is I'll hang out. If there are additional questions that I could answer, I will be checking the chat or the Q&A here. I think we have the Q&A. Here we go. Okay, so, oh, it says the chat is disabled, but it looks like I don't see any questions here. But Stacy, thank you for letting us know. I believe that the webinar does that automatically, so I apologize for that. So let me go ahead and stick the evaluation link here. Okay, so did that come through? Okay, so everybody should see, if you open the question and answer, you can see the link that you can click on to go directly to the evaluation. If for some reason that's not working for you, the crazy link over here is available to you, but hopefully everybody can go ahead and hop into that Q&A. and grab the link. All right, let's see. There's another question coming in. Okay, Tina mentioned that it's disabled. I'm going to add the link for you, Tina. I thought that this would go to everybody, and I'm not 100% sure if, how come it's not letting me answer? All right, bear with me 1 second. Hmm. Chat is disabled. Okay, I'm trying to answer the question, and it is type an answer. Okay, here we go. So, Tina, maybe you can let me know if you received it, and Mary Lou. But what I don't know is I don't know if the rest of the group is receiving it. So if you have not yet been able to grab that link, I'm going to just ask you to type in the Q&A for me. Okay. Well, that's really a shame that I can't send it to the whole group. Oh, Eileen said you got it. That's great. So maybe that is going to everybody. And Nancy's saying you got it. Excellent. Okay, super. So if there's any other questions, I'll hang out momentarily. And I hope you found this useful today. And I look forward to reading those evaluations and certainly wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and happy holiday season.